Hi everyone, it's me, Miss McCrone, and thanks for coming back for day 2 of our science lessons on ecosystems and adaptations. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been focusing a lot on how a plant or animal changes throughout its lifetime, and we call this a life cycle. This week, we are going to focus on a different kind of change that happens over time. And I'm not talking about like as an animal or plant gets older. I'm talking about changes that happen over hundreds and thousands of years. So let's get started by focusing and explaining some of the vocabulary that you need to know in order to understand this lesson. All right, so this is the slideshow, and I will have the exact same slides also in our Nearpod later on in our lesson for you to go back and look at again. All right, so as I was saying, we know that certain plants and animals, well, actually all plants and animals, go through a life cycle, which means they change as they grow older. Some have a much more dramatic change, like a caterpillar and a frog goes through metamorphosis, but plants may not have as dramatic of a change. They just develop new parts of the plant as they grow older. The changes that we're going to be talking about this week, in order to understand them, we need to take a big step back and not really look at just one plant or animal at a time. And when I say we need to take a big step back, I mean huge, like this big. As you can see, we have zoomed way out. We are not looking at a plant or an animal anymore. We are looking at the entire world. And the thing is, there are plants and animals that live on every corner of the earth. So when we look at something like this earth, we know and we can see that there are snowy places that animals can live. We've got dark, deep oceans. We've got shallow coral reefs, forests, jungles, grasslands, deserts. I can even see some snow-covered mountains. And the thing is, there's plants and animals that live in all of these places. So it's important to understand in order to know how those animals live there, we need to know what those places are like. So the first thing that we need to understand is exactly what an ecosystem is. So an ecosystem is an area made up of living and non-living things. It includes plants, animals, and other non-living things such as soil, water, air, and all together these things create a community of life. So as you can see in this picture, we've got a lot of different animals. It looks like a couple types of birds. We've got alligators hanging out. We also have tons of types of plants. We've got short grass, long grass, different types of trees in the background. Then we also have non-living things like the water that these alligators are living in. But the thing is, alligators and these birds are very different animals. So it's important to understand that different parts of this ecosystem are going to be important to these different animals. And that brings us to the word habitat. So a habitat is the natural home of a plant or animal. Habitats must include everything that a plant or animal needs to live, which means it needs to have water, air, space, and shelter. Now, as you can see, since an alligator and a bird are very different types of animals, their habitats are going to look very different. Our alligator here in this picture has a lot of water. It's living pretty much all in the water, and it's got kind of grassy plants all over the place. Well, the bird's habitat looks very different. It's living up in a tree. It doesn't need the water surrounding it the way an alligator does. It's got probably a lot more space to fly around, and it builds its own shelter. So as you can see, both of these are habitats, but they look very different because these animals are very different species. Now, here's a word that you may have heard a teacher or a scientist use before, and we're going to actually discuss what it means. So I'm sure you've heard even me say the word organism. An organism is any living thing, which means it's a plant, an animal, or something else. So the way I like to think about it is this is just a really fancy scientific word for plants, animals, fungus or like mushrooms, or even teeny tiny germs like bacteria. And that just means that all these things are living things. So the fancy scientific term we can use for that is an organism. Now, all of these organisms that live in different ecosystems and habitats are broken down into three categories. And you're going to learn more about these categories probably next week. But the first one you need to know is called a producer. A producer is an organism that creates their own food and energy from the sun. And that's through a process called photosynthesis. So I like to teach my students it this way. Think of a music producer. A music producer creates their own music, or a movie producer creates their own movies. Well, in nature, a producer is an organism or a living thing that creates its own food and energy. And the best example is most plants. All plants are pretty much producers because they can create their own food and energy from the sun. The next word is consumer. So an organism that is a consumer cannot create their own food, which means they have to go out and look for food and eat other living things. So the best example for this is animals. Animals are consumers. Now, I know you might be thinking, well, lots of animals means lots of different things that they can eat. And you're right. Some consumers eat only plants, kind of like these elephants in this picture, but other consumers eat meat, like the lions that might hunt the elephants. So, depending on what the consumer eats, it can either be a plant eater or a meat eater. The last and very important type of organism you need to know is a decomposer. A decomposer is something that eats dead and decaying matter, such as dead plants and animals. The best examples of this that you could probably find in your own backyard are mushrooms, which are a type of fungus, worms, and then bacteria, which is a lot harder to see. And the thing is, these are super important because it's kind of gross to think about, but plants and animals die all the time. They get old and they die. And there's a reason that they're not all just laying around hanging out, which would be really gross. And that's because of decomposers. If we didn't have decomposers, it would probably be a lot grosser and smellier out there whenever we walk through the woods. So we're gotta kind of be thankful for them, right? So once you understand that all living things in an ecosystem are either producers, consumers, or decomposers, you can start taking a closer look at the ways that they're all different. And they usually are different because of their different adaptations. So an adaptation is the way an organism has developed or changed over time in order to help it survive in its ecosystem. So, what that means is there's a reason that lions look like lions and a reason elephants look like elephants. Because over hundreds and thousands of years, they have developed and changed. So that's why it's a different change from a life cycle. We're not talking about one lifetime. We're talking about changes that happen over thousands and thousands of years. So there's basically two ways an animal can have an adaptation, or a plant can have an adaptation. And the first one is called physical or structural. And that means it's an actual part of their body that helps them survive. So that could be fur or skin color that might help them camouflage. That could be different horns and claws and teeth. They could have some kind of shell on their back, like a crab or a turtle. Plants also can have thorns and spikes and different appearances to help them survive. The second type of adaptation is called behavioral. A behavioral adaptation isn't really what the animal looks like. or what the plant looks like. Instead, it's their actions. So you got to think about what the plant or animal is doing or how they're behaving. So the best example would be migrations, living and hunting in groups or packs, hibernating, and dormancy. So let's take a closer look at what these things actually look like. So a physical or structural adaptation could be the following. As you can see right here in this first picture, we have a cool picture of an owl. And either that owl is trying to hide from a bigger, scarier animal, and the way it hides is by blending into the tree bark, or that owl is trying to hunt for its dinner and it doesn't want to be seen, so it can sneak up on something. And again, it's blending into the background. Other animals like the snow leopards have really sharp claws and teeth, and that's what helps them hunt really, really well. And then, like I said before, there could be this turtle that can't move very quickly. So if it gets caught by a predator, it can hide in its shell for protection. So as you can see, all of these things are actual parts of plant and animal's body, and that's what helps them survive. And like I said, plants can have the same thing too. So cactus and roses have spikes and thorns, which means if an animal came around and wanted to eat that cactus, it might kind of think twice as when it sees all those spikes. It knows that that might be a little painful to eat, so it moves on and finds a different plant to eat instead. Now, a behavioral adaptation are the following. We've got, as you see up here, and I know we've all experienced these on either field trips, walks in the park, or on our own playground, geese. Every year, geese fly south for the winter. So they know that their body can't survive the cold, cold winter. So they fly or move, that's their behavior or their action, to a warmer place. Another great example, like these wolves and the antelope, are living in groups. So the wolves hunt in a group so they can work together like a team. And antelope live in groups so that they can all help each other, warn each other from lions and tigers and things like that. Now, we all know about bears, right? Bears survive the winter not by anything on their body, but by going to sleep and hibernating through most of the winter. And actually, most plants do the same thing. If you have a plant or a tree in your neighborhood that loses its leaves during the winter, that's kind of like the plant going to sleep, and we call that dormancy. So again, it's not part of the animal or plant's body, but instead what they're doing. Now, the thing about adaptations is many adaptations are directly linked or connected to the ecosystem that these animals live in. So for example, there's a reason polar bears, which live in the Arctic, have white fur, and it's to blend in with the snow, versus an animal that lives in the desert, like this fox, might have more of a sandy brown color. And then animals like this jaguar or panther that lives in the jungle are going to be darker or spotted in order to blend in with all the shadows of the trees. So that's why understanding an ecosystem can help you understand why an animal has adapted to live in that ecosystem. And plants are no different. So if you take a look at these different plants, again, we have the Arctic, the desert, and the jungle, and three types of plants that look very different because of the ecosystem that they live in, right? A Arctic plant is going to be able to survive the snow. A desert plant doesn't need as much water, so it's going to be able to survive and grow in warm, dry climates. And those jungle, I mean, look at this picture. We've got a plant that's basically growing out of a river or a lake or a pond because there's so much water in the jungle. Now, if we switched any of these plants up, they probably wouldn't survive in a different ecosystem. And that's because over thousands and thousands of years, they've adapted to their specific home or their home habitat or ecosystem. So, Elliot, I remember your question from our shout out video about why different plants need different amounts of water. I'm hoping by now you may have realized that maybe different plants come from different habitats or ecosystems. So these cactus don't need as much water as the plants from the jungle. So next time you're doing an experiment like our Gizmos lab from last week, you can kind of take a look and try to figure out or make an inference about where your plant might originally come from. Because if it doesn't need that much water, it might be from a very dry ecosystem. So from here, we're going to go ahead and start looking at our Nearpod. Now, the first few pages on our slides in our Nearpod are actually the same slides from that I just showed you. So we're going to skip through those. Those are there so that you can look at them again to help you study throughout the lesson. So this week, our Nearpod code is ZTFBS. Again, that was ZTFBS. Once you're in, as a reminder, you guys can either put your first name or your initials and then tell me what school you're coming from. So I still have a couple people who are typing in as name Miss McCrone, which is not what I want you guys doing. I want you guys to put either your name or your initials, right? Okay, so I'm putting my name in this one. And then again, for other, which is optional, you don't have to tell me what school you're coming from, but if you want to share what school you are to show your school pride, and hopefully I can add that into the shout out so your teachers and your fellow students at that school can be proud of you, go ahead. Okay, so once you press join session, there we are. Here's our first page. So again, we're focusing on what an ecosystem is and what adaptations are. All right, so here's the slides so that you can review. As you can see, they're the same ones that we went over in my slideshow. Here they are again for you. All right, so now the first thing that we are going to do is we're going to watch this video from Study Jams. I don't know if you guys have ever used Study Jams before at your school. I think Study Jams is an awesome way to review your material. And they're going to just explain a little bit further what an adaptation is. So let's take a look.
Look at all these butterflies. I've never seen this many at once. Yeah, there've been a ton of them lately. Must be the time of year that they migrate. Zoe, butterflies don't migrate. Monarch butterflies do. Really? Why? Well, migration is an adaptation for monarch butterflies. An adaptation is a change a living thing goes through so it fits better with its environment. But I thought adaptations were physical. Well, some adaptations are physical, but others are behavioral. Physical adaptations happen when organisms gradually develop physical characteristics that help them survive. The bright orange color of these butterflies is a physical adaptation. The bright color warns predators that the butterfly is poisonous to eat. Colors can make snapping a pic pretty difficult too. When colors help an animal blend into its surroundings, they're called camouflage. Camouflage is a physical adaptation that allows an animal to hide from its enemies or from its prey. Tiger stripes are camouflage. So is the color of a deer. What about chameleons? They can actually change colors. Yep, that's a great example. So is color the only physical adaptation? No way. Lots of physical traits are adaptations, like lungs and limbs in amphibians. How else would they survive on land? Well, millions of years ago, amphibians were underwater animals. The lungs and limbs they have today are adaptations that happened over a very long time. As their environment changed, they were forced to adapt. When organisms pass on important traits that help them survive to the next generation, it's called natural selection. The needed traits are selected and passed on, and other traits that aren't needed gradually disappear over time. Cool. So, if those are all physical adaptations, what are adaptations like migration called? Oh yeah, Adaptations like migration are called inherited behaviors or instinct. Inherited behaviors are actions, things organisms do to maximize their survival. The butterflies migrate to survive? Yep. Butterflies migrate to warmer climates where they can survive and find more food. Birds migrate too. Even some kinds of fish, like salmon, migrate. Are there other inherited behaviors? Yeah, hibernation is an inherited behavior. So is playing dead. Playing dead? That's right. Animals like the possum play dead to protect themselves when a predator is near. They freeze. Freeze! Wow, great pick. Yep, thanks. I think I get adaptations now too. Organisms improve their chances of survival in certain conditions through adaptations. Some adaptations are physical, and some are behavioral. Adaptation doesn't happen overnight. It takes many generations to occur. Through natural selection, organisms pass down the traits that increase survival to future generations, while less useful traits aren't passed on and eventually disappear. Nice work, Mia. You rocked that. Thanks. All it took was a little focus.
All right, so as you could see from that video, they really highlighted that adaptations can be both physical and behavioral. The other thing that I think is really important that that video showed is that adaptations don't happen fast. They happen over a very long period of time because an ecosystem changes. So once the ecosystem or the habitats that those plants and animals live in begin to change, the actual animal begins to change as well in order to survive. So let's go back to our Nearpod and check out this really cool activity I have for you guys there. Inside the Nearpod, there's a way for you to do a 3D exploration. So I want you guys to practice making observations and identifying adaptations through this 3D image of a great white shark. So I picked a really kind of scary animal that might be kind of cool to look at, but not actually be right next to. And what you can do is when you get to this page, you can actually use your mouse to click it, spin it. You can zoom in and zoom out so you can see closer up. You can flip it over to see the front. You can flip it to see the back. All around the bottom, the top, you can take a nice close look at its face. Woo, went too far. There you go, see? And you can move it around all you want. So then, in order to get in my shout out video for next week, you need to go on to the next screen where we have our open-ended question. Here, I want you guys to share with me as many adaptations as you can find on this shark. So you have to answer the following questions. 1, what type of organism do you think this shark is? Do you think it's a producer, a consumer, or a decomposer? So if you need to go back to the slide that explains those 3, go ahead, no problem. You can always go back and then come back to this question later. Number 2, it says, what physical or structural adaptations do you see on the shark? So I want you to tell me as many as you can find, okay? Then the third question I want you to answer is, what type of ecosystem or habitat do you think this shark needs in order to survive? So once you've identified all of those different adaptations, I want you to think about, where would this shark live and what kind of ecosystem and habitat would it need, okay? Once you've done that, you can press submit and go on to the end, okay? So that's the end of our Nearpod. The next thing that we are going to do is I'm going to go over our Gizmo lab for this week, and I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. And I know I have, there's only about 4 things that you need to do on this Gizmo, but there's tons of options if you're enjoying it and you want to do more, okay? So again, remember, you may not have this Gizmo assigned to you. You may have to log into Clever and look for the Gizmo yourself. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. Okay, so once you go into Gizmos, you're going to see either this home screen, this blue screen right here, or you might it might automatically take you to one of your classes like this. Again, if you can't see the gizmos, right, you're going to have to search for it yourself. So you're going to go right here to find gizmo, and we're going to type in climate. All right, so see how these ones come up here? It says comparing climates. There's two, okay? One says metric, the other says customary. You are going to select the customary one. Okay, so once you do that, this is what your screen should look like, and you are going to launch your gizmo. Now, again, in our observation notebook for this week, there is a activity page for you to work on alongside of this. I'm not going to do the activity with you. Again, I'm just going to show you how to set your gizmo up. So once you've launched your gizmo, as you can see, we are looking at the entire Earth right now. You can move it around. You could click it and spin it. To me, like I said, like at the beginning of my slideshow, we're looking at the whole Earth, so that's way too much. There's too many different ecosystems, too many different animals right now that is in our view. We've got to look at a specific one much closer. So you are going to click on landscape. Okay, so it's this middle button up here. There's 3 different tabs. You've got data, landscape, world map. You are going to click on landscape. Then you are going to look at your observation notebook. Here it says, using the gizmo, find an example of an animal adaptation in a cold climate, warm climate, wet climate, and a dry climate. Write the location, animal name, and adaptations, and how the adaptation helps the organism survive below. So it says, remember, adaptations can be physical features or behaviors, right? So there's 2 types of adaptations. So to kind of help you guys, I've already picked 4 climates for you. So I found one that's cold, we found one that's hot, wet, and dry. So the first location you're going to look at is this cold climate right here, which is called Yellowknife. So you're going to go back to your gizmo, and if you look down here at the bottom, we have locations. You can click on that, and here we go. Here's Yellowknife, okay? And if you look up here at the top, we can find out exactly where it is. This is up in Canada. It says the average temperature is negative 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Whew, that is cold, okay? So as you can see, we've got 2 types of animals here. It looks like we have a caribou, which is a type of like deer or elk, and we've got a gray wolf. So when you click on them, you can see that they give you a description of the animal. And when you start reading about the animal, it will give you different adaptations. So you can just look at the way the animal looks, or you can read the description on your own. Once you do that, you can type in the animal, wolf, the caribou, okay? You can choose which one. Then you're going to add your adaptation here. And then you're going to tell me exactly how does this adaptation help the animal survive. Now remember, if you go in through the lesson plan and you click on this document and you cannot type, meaning it's not letting you type in there, it means you need to make a copy. So you go to File, right? File, make a copy. I went over this on the first day, but I wanted to make sure in case you come across the problem again, know exactly how to make a copy. So you press make a copy here. It's going to ask you to rename it. You can name the document whatever you want. And when you're done, press OK. All right, so then you go on to your hot climate, which looks like Cairo. Cairo is located in Egypt, right? Then we've got our wet climate, which is Miami, down in Florida. Ooh, look at that. It's like a swamp, right? And then we've got our dry climate, which is Sydney, which is in Australia. Okay? So that's the different ecosystems. So again, we're changing the ecosystem and we're going to see how the animals and the plants have adapted to that. So if you look at your observation sheet for gizmos, this first part right here on top is all about animals. If you go down, we do the same thing again for plants. So you're going to type in the name of the plant, the adaptation, and exactly how that adaptation helps the animal, or the plant survive. Now, again, I've only picked 4 for you. 1 cold, 1 warm, 1 dry, 1 wet. You can absolutely go back to these locations, and look how many more we have. We've got New York, Kansas City, San Francisco. We've got Barcelona. Like, there are countries and cities from all over the world, different climates and ecosystems that you can choose. So if you want to go back and look at these again, go ahead, keep going with the Gizmo. Another feature that once you're done with our lab sheet, you can always change the time of year as well. So if you wanted to look at what New York's climate is like in January, you can see it's snowy now. You can also go in August and you can see how different seasons can change the ecosystem, and then you can see exactly how have the plants and animals adapted to the changes in the seasons as well. So there's tons of things for you to do in this Gizmo. There's so much, okay? You guys have tons of options. I really hope you enjoy it. Like I said, learning about different animals and their adaptations is one of my favorite things. I can't wait to see what you guys come up with in our little 3D shark exploration next week. I'm really excited. I can't wait to make my shout out video, and I hope you guys enjoy. I hope you guys learn a lot, and I'll see you guys later. Bye, everyone.